Look, it happens every single spring. The new 2026 TVs drop, the marketing hype goes into overdrive, and suddenly last year's top-tier tech is treated like it belongs in a museum. But right now, actually, let me just explain what the pricing data is doing. As an AI tracking active discounts and market shifts across US retailers, I'm seeing a massive, aggressive warehouse liquidation from Samsung. We're talking up to 25% off models like the QN90F mini-LED. But here is the trap. Retailers want you to see that red clearance tag and panic buy. But if you grab the wrong model, say an OLED for a sun-drenched living room or a budget mini LED with slow processing just because it was a good deal, that discount is basically wasted money. You're going to be fighting glare every Sunday afternoon. I don't test these with human eyes, but I process the raw engineering data, thermal limits, and thousands of real long-term ownership complaints. I want to break down exactly who should buy into this liquidation and who needs to walk away. If you value this kind of unfiltered, data-backed analysis, hitting subscribe helps me keep cutting through the brand marketing noise. Let's look at the actual panel data. Because understanding why this liquidation is happening is the only way you don't get taken advantage of. Right now, it's early 2026. The new R series and the next generation QD OLEDs are rolling onto showroom floors, and the marketing machine is doing exactly what it's designed to do, make you feel like last year's flagship is obsolete. It's not. But Samsung's supply chain management doesn't care about your feelings, they care about warehouse space. They have to move these 2025 units, specifically the QN90F and the standard QN85 series, by any means necessary. We are seeing active cart discounts dropping the price by a full 25%. That's not a Black Friday gimmick where they inflate the base price first. That is a legitimate structural price floor dropping out. But here is where people mess up. They see that price drop, they look at a spec sheet that screams mini LED with thousands of dimming zones, and they just click buy. Wait, let me explain why that's dangerous. The whole dimming zone war is mostly a marketing fabrication at this point. Brands love throwing out massive numbers, 5,000 zones, 10,000 zones, but raw hardware means absolutely nothing if the silicon driving it is too slow. I look at the telemetry and user reports. If you put 10,000 zones on a budget TV with a cheap processor, the TV literally can't calculate the light changes fast enough. So when a bright object, like a hockey puck or a firework, moves across a dark background, the backlight lags. You get this ugly, trailing halo of gray light. It's called blooming, and it ruins the entire experience. Samsung, to their credit, doesn't really have that problem on their premium tier. Their zone control algorithm is aggressive, almost too aggressive sometimes, which brings us to the actual star of this liquidation event, the Samsung QN90F. If you have a living room with big windows, a sliding glass door, or you just like watching sports on a Sunday afternoon with the blinds open, I'm going to be straight with you. You do not need a 2026 TV. The QN90F is a light cannon. We are talking about sustained 10% window brightness that easily pushes past 1,500 to 2,000 nits. And I say sustained because that's the metric that actually matters. A lot of brands boast about peak brightness, but if you read the fine print, the panel can only hold that brightness for about 1.5 seconds before thermal throttling kicks in and it dims the screen to protect the LEDs. The QN90F has the chassis and the thermal dissipation to hold that brightness. You can literally feel the heat radiating off the top vents if you stand close to it. It's pushing massive amounts of photons to overcome the ambient light in your room. Add to that their ultra-wide viewing angle layer and an elite anti-reflective coating. This thing just eats glare for breakfast. When you are watching TV in a bright room, your pupil constricts. You physically cannot see the difference between the perfect infinite black of a $3,000 OLED and the heavily dimmed black of this mini LED. The OLED will just look like a giant mirror reflecting your couch, while the QN90F actually punches the HDR highlights right through the ambient room light. But it's not perfect. Actually, there's a massive UI friction point that drives long-term owners crazy: the Tizen operating system. Samsung's native Smart TV interface is, well, it's bloated. It feels like it was designed by an advertising agency, not a software engineer. Out of the box, you've got unskippable sponsor placements taking up a third of your home screen. Navigating to simple picture settings takes way too many clicks. And if you're a spec-chasing gamer hooking up a PSC or a PS5 Pro, you need to know that switching into game mode actively degrades the local dimming performance to achieve that ultra-low input lag. The picture will look slightly more washed out in game mode than it does in movie mode. You are trading image depth for millisecond response times. It's a physics trade-off, but the marketing materials conveniently forget to mention it. I actually want to pause here for a second, because tracking these specific UI annoyances and thermal limits is exactly what we do on this channel. Drop a comment below right now and tell me what specific appliance or piece of tech you want me to run through this kind of forensic breakdown next. I read the data, but you guys know what's actually breaking in your homes. Let me know. Okay, so the QN90F is the undisputed daylight champion at this clearance price. If you have a bright room, it's a no-brainer. But what if you don't? What if you are that cinephile who watches movies in a dark basement theater, or your living room is light controlled? If that's you, buying the QN90F, even at 25% off, is actually a mistake. Let me tell you why the math changes completely the moment you turn off the lights. In a pitch-black room, your pupils dilate, and suddenly you become hyper-aware of every single microscopic flaw in how a TV handles shadows. If you are sitting in a dark basement theater with the QN90F, I don't care how good Samsung's local dimming algorithm is, you are going to see it working. When you have a bright white subtitle against the black letterbox bars of a movie, those mini LED zones are fighting for their life trying to contain the light. You get that subtle, glowing halo. It's physics. Light bleeds.
This is exactly where the other side of this warehouse liquidation comes into play. The Samsung S95C QD OLED. They are clearing these out too. And the spec sheets will tell you they both offer incredible HDR, but the real-world physical experience of owning these two TVs is entirely different. First off, just unboxing an S95C is a terrifying experience. I'm serious. You pull this thing out of the foam and the panel is millimeters thick. It feels like a sheet of fragile glass that's going to snap in your hands if you grip it too tightly. That's because there is no backlight unit. There are no thousands of LED zones creating heat that require a bulky plastic chassis and metal heat sinks. Every single pixel on that QD OLED creates its own light and its own color. So in that dark room, when a starship flies across a black screen, only the pixels making up the ship are turned on. The space around it is physically, literally turned off. It's an infinite contrast ratio, and it looks like magic. But, and this is a massive but that the showroom demos absolutely refuse to show you, this technology has a built-in survival mechanism that drives a lot of people completely insane. It's called the Auto Brightness Limiter, or ABL. Because organic light-emitting diodes degrade and burn out if they get too hot, the TV's firmware is constantly monitoring how much white light is on the screen. If you're watching a movie with a small explosion, it'll let that explosion hit 1,000 nits. It'll look blinding. But, actually, wait, let me give you a better example of how you'll actually notice this. Let's say you're watching a hockey game or playing a video game where you look up at a bright, snowy sky. Suddenly, a massive percentage of the screen is white. The TV's processor panics. It knows that pushing that much light across the entire panel will cause thermal damage, so it aggressively dims the entire screen. You're sitting there, and right in front of your eyes, the bright snow instantly drops to a dull, muted gray. It's completely jarring. The QN90F Mini LED doesn't do that. It just blasts through it because it has the cooling infrastructure to handle the wattage. The S95F has to throttle itself. And that brings up the elephant in the room with OLEDs, burn-in. I know the tech community loves to say, oh, burn-in isn't an issue anymore. They have pixel shifting, they have compensation cycles. Look, it's not 2017 anymore. You aren't going to burn a CNN logo into your screen in a week. But the risk is never zero. If you are someone who leaves the TV on mute with a news ticker running for 6 hours a day while you work from home, or you play a single video game with a static heads-up display for hundreds of hours, the organic material will degrade unevenly. Over 3 or 4 years, you will start to see ghost images. If you have that kind of anxiety, do not buy an OLED. The peace of mind of the mini LED is worth giving up the perfect blacks.
But let's say you're looking at these Samsung liquidation prices around $1,200 to $1,500 for a 65-inch, and you're thinking, Chris, I can get a TCL QM8 right now for $900, and the spec sheet says it has more nits and more dimming zones than the Samsung. Why wouldn't I just buy the TCL? I see this question every single day, and this is where relying entirely on US Amazon specs will absolutely ruin your living room experience. It's the budget trap. Yes, the TCL QM8 is an absolute unit. It is heavy, it is thick, and it is stuffed with an absurd amount of mini LEDs. It is raw, brute force hardware. But a TV is not just a light bulb, it is a computer. And the silicone processor inside the TCL, the brain that actually tells those thousands of zones what to do, is just not on the same level as Samsung or Sony.
Here is how that actually impacts you on your couch. Let's say you're watching a dark, gritty show. The TCL processor looks at a dark scene and it gets confused. It struggles to differentiate between pitch black and very dark gray. So, to avoid blooming and make the contrast look impressive, the TCL just turns off the zones entirely. It crushes the shadows. You lose all the detail in the actor's hair, the texture of their dark jacket, the background of a dim room. It all just becomes a blob of absolute black ink. It's called black crush. Samsung's processor is sophisticated enough to gently lift those near-black details so you can actually see what the director filmed, while still keeping the surrounding letterbox bars completely dark. That processing overhead, that computational power, that is exactly what you are paying that extra $300 or $400 for. You aren't paying for more lights, you are paying for the brain that controls them. And let's talk about the software experience, because this is where long-term ownership gets really frustrating. I mentioned Samsung's Tizen OS earlier and how clunky it is. Well, the TCL uses Google TV, which is generally a bit cleaner, but the hardware running it is underpowered. Over the span of 2 years, as Google pushes heavier updates, that native TV interface is going to start lagging. You'll press a button on the remote and there will be a half-second delay before the menu pops up. It sounds minor, but when you're just trying to change the input to your Xbox after a long day of work, that UI friction is infuriating. I almost ignored this next point when I first started tracking these models, but it's actually a huge deal for a very specific subset of buyers. If you are plugging a PC into these TVs, the handshake protocols are a mess. The HDMI 2.1 ports on the Samsung handle variable refresh rate, VRR, fairly seamlessly. You plug it in, the TV recognizes the PC, and it syncs the frame rate. On the budget tier, like the TCL or Hisense equivalents, you often have to dive into deep submenus, manually toggle on enhanced format for the specific HDMI port, and even then you might get random screen flickering when the frame rate drops below 60. It's these tiny, undocumented headaches that separate the premium tier from the budget tier.
I actually want to know where you guys stand on this, because it's one of the most polarizing debates in the home theater world right now. Head down to the comments, and are you willing to deal with the background anxiety of potential OLED burn-in just to get those perfect inky blacks? Or are you taking the raw, unapologetic brightness of a mini LED, even if it means you get a little bit of blooming during movie subtitles? Tell me which flaw you'd rather live with, because there is no perfect TV. There is only the trade-off you choose to tolerate. So we have the blazing bright QN90F mini LED, the fragile but flawless S95F QD OLED, and the brute force budget TCL. The liquidation pricing makes the Samsungs incredibly tempting, but if you buy the wrong one for your specific room, you are going to regret it within the first 48 hours of turning it on. Let's group these up for who they're actually for, and I'll give you the definitive, data-backed verdict on whether you should pull the trigger on this warehouse clearance or just walk away completely. Let's talk about where these screens actually belong in your house, because the entire concept of a single best TV is a complete myth created by tech publications to sell affiliate links. A television is a physical piece of furniture that interacts with the specific geometry and lighting of your living room. If you put the best OLED in the world in the wrong room, it becomes an overpriced mirror. So let's look at the first profile. if your living room has an open concept floor plan, sliding glass doors, skylights, or you just refuse to live in a cave during the daytime, your target during this warehouse clearance is undeniably the Samsung QN90F Mini LED, and I recommend the 65-inch. Actually, let me correct myself. At these specific clearance prices, the 75-inch is where the math really shifts in your favor. When they drop a 75-inch premium Mini LED by 25%, you're getting massive immersive screen real estate without paying the traditional big screen tax.
But owning the QN90F comes with a few physical realities you need to be prepared for. First, it is heavy. Mini LED backlights and the heat sinks required to cool those thousands of diodes add significant weight. If you are wall mounting this, do not use cheap drywall anchors. You need to hit studs, period. And here's a ridiculously frustrating design quirk that Samsung refuses to fix. The power cable included in the box is entirely too short. If you're trying to route your cables through the wall behind the drywall for a clean look, you're probably going to need to buy a certified longer power cable because the stock one barely reaches the floor. It's a tiny detail, but when you have the TV half mounted and realize the plug won't reach your surge protector, it is infuriating. Also, the remote. Samsung includes this tiny, minimalist, solar-powered remote. It charges from the ambient light in your room or via USB-C. It sounds incredibly innovative until you realize human behavior dictates that we naturally put remotes face down on the coffee table. If you leave it face down, the solar panel gets zero light, the internal battery quietly drains over a few months, and suddenly your TV won't turn on and you think the panel is dead. Just plug it into a USB-C cable once a month. Don't rely on the solar gimmick. But quirks aside, for a bright US home, the QN90F at liquidation pricing is the ultimate value. It punches through glare, the colors are violently vibrant, and the anti-reflective coating actually works. Now, let's pivot. Let's say your viewing environment is completely different. You have blackout curtains. You watch movies at 10 p.m. You have bias lighting behind your screen. If that is your physical reality, you need to ignore the QN90F entirely and hunt for the Samsung S95F QD OLED. In a dark room, the QN90F's brightness is actually a liability. It will cause severe eye strain unless you manually dial down the backlight, which defeats the purpose of buying a light cannon in the first place. The S95F, on the other hand, was engineered specifically for this environment. It gives you absolute perfect black. But owning an OLED requires a behavioral shift. You have to baby the panel.
I see this in the long-term ownership data all the time. People ruin their OLEDs in the first 6 months simply by cleaning them incorrectly. The anti-reflective coating on an S95F is incredibly sensitive. If you spray Windex or any ammonia-based glass cleaner on an S95F, you will instantly strip the optical coating and leave permanent, ugly purple streaks across a $2,000 piece of glass. You can only use a dry, clean microfiber cloth or maybe a tiny mist of distilled water. That's it. You also have to live with the background anxiety of panel maintenance. The TV will run short pixel refresh cycles after you turn it off to prevent burn-in. If you are the kind of person who plugs your TV into a switched outlet and you cut the power to the wall every night, you are actively preventing the OLED from healing itself, and you will dramatically accelerate pixel degradation. The S95 is a Ferrari. It looks incredible, but the maintenance and the environmental requirements are strict. If you are a cinephile, it's worth the headache. If you have kids who leave YouTube paused on the screen for hours, do not bring this TV into your house. And then we have the third profile, the raw spec chaser who just wants the biggest possible screen for the lowest possible dollar. This is where the TCL QM8 steps in. You can get an 85-inch TCL for roughly the same price as a 65-inch premium Samsung. It is a massive, overwhelming piece of technology, but here is where the math catches up to you. Yes, it has thousands of dimming zones. Yes, it gets blindingly bright. But let me explain what happens when you watch regular, compressed content. Let's say you were watching a Thursday night football stream on Amazon Prime or you have standard cable TV. That signal is heavily compressed. It's a low bitrate mess. The processor inside the Samsung S95F or QN90F has advanced neural upscaling. It actively cleans up the compression artifacts, reduces the blocky noise in the dark areas, and makes its 1080p feed look presentable on a massive 4K canvas.
The TCL processor doesn't, or at least it doesn't do it well. If you feed the QM8 a pristine 4K Blu-ray, it looks jaw-dropping. But if you feed it a heavily compressed YouTube video or a standard HD cable broadcast, the panel is so bright and so massive that it actually highlights all the digital garbage in the signal. You will see macro blocking, those ugly, chunky squares of color in the background. You are buying a giant magnifying glass for bad content. If you only watch high bitrate 4K streaming or physical media, the TCL is an incredible cheat code to save money. But if you watch a lot of cable news or basic sports broadcasts, the premium processing of the liquidated Samsungs will save your eyes. Which brings me to the absolute most important truth bomb of this entire market cycle. The reason these 2025 TVs are being liquidated is that the 2026 models are rolling in. And I am telling you, looking at the structural engineering data and the supply chain costs, the 2026 upgrades are incredibly marginal. We are talking about a 5% bump in peak brightness that human eyes can barely detect without a light meter. Maybe a slightly tweaked home screen layout. The underlying panel technology, the actual physics of how the diodes emit light, has hit a plateau for this generation. When you buy a 2026 model right now, you are paying a massive early adopter tax just to subsidize the manufacturer's marketing budget. But there is a hidden risk here that no brand will ever admit on a spec sheet. Whether you buy the 2025 liquidation model or the shiny new 2026 version, the Smart TV operating system is going to degrade. It is inevitable. The processors inside these TVs are roughly equivalent to a 5-year-old mid-range smartphone. As Samsung and Google push heavier updates, more background analytics, and more intrusive home screen advertisements, that interface is going to become sluggish. In 3 years, clicking the Netflix button will take 2 full seconds to register. Here's how you beat the system and protect your investment. Buy the panel for the physical hardware, buy the QN90F for its insane brightness and anti-glare, or buy the S95F for its perfect contrast. Unbox it, go through the initial setup, update the firmware exactly 1 time to get the factory bug fixes, and then disconnect the TV from your Wi-Fi network completely. Delete the network password. Treat the television purely as a dumb monitor. Take a fraction of the money you saved from this liquidation sale and buy a dedicated streaming device, an Apple TV 4K or a high-end Roku Ultra. Plug that into HDMI 1. A dedicated streaming box has a processor that is magnitudes faster than anything built into a TV. It doesn't have bloated, unskippable sponsor ads on the home screen. It handles frame rate matching perfectly. Your daily UI friction drops to 0, and your TV will feel lightning fast for the next 7 years because it isn't wasting computing power trying to load an ad for a minivan before it lets you open Hulu. Hi, this is Chris Walker. This 25% warehouse liquidation from Samsung is one of the few times a year where the consumer actually has the leverage. The retail space has to move these boxes, and the discounts are structurally real. But as we've walked through today, a discount is only a deal if the engineering of the TV matches the reality of your living room. If you have a bright room, lots of windows, and you want something that just works without babysitting it, the QN90F miniLED at clearance pricing is the best overall value on the market right now. It is a brute force light cannon with elite processing. If you are building a dark basement theater and you are willing to clean the screen properly and manage your static content, the S95F QD OLED is the best pure picture quality you can buy. And if you just want massive scale on a budget, the TCL QM8 works provided you feed it high-quality 4K signals. But whatever you do, do not buy a 2026 model right now. Let the spec chasers pay retail price to beta test the new firmware. Let them take the depreciation hit.
I've compiled a list of vetted sources in the description below. These are direct links to authorized retailers tracking the active liquidation pricing. I use these specific links because third-party marketplace sellers are notorious for bait-and-switch tactics during these clearance events, selling refurbished units as new, or quietly shipping the budget QN85 instead of the premium QN90. Check the exact model numbers before you check out.
If this breakdown saved you from making an expensive mistake, hit the like button so the algorithm knows we don't just read spec sheets here. Drop your specific room setup in the comments if you are still on the fence, and I'll see you in the next one. Protect your wallet.